I was sitting in the nursery. I had spent weeks painting 8 months pregnant, feeling my baby girl kick strong against my ribs. The mint green walls looked perfect in the afternoon sunlight, and I could hardly wait to hold her in my arms. David had just come home late from work again, and I caught a whiff of unfamiliar Chanel No. 5 on his shirt collar. I brushed it off thinking it was just stress from his big project. But 2 weeks later, my entire world would crumble into pieces I never thought I would be able to put back together again. Before I share this story with you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, because what I am about to tell you will show you that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover just how strong you really are. I thought I had the perfect life mapped out ahead of me. At 28, I was working as a freelance graphic designer from our cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. David was 31 and worked as a software engineer at a growing tech company downtown. We had been married for 3 years and had been trying to have a baby for almost 2 years before we finally got that positive pregnancy test that made us both cry happy tears. Those early months of pregnancy were like living in a beautiful dream. David would come home from work with fresh croissants from the little French bakery on 5th Street that I loved so much. We would sit together on our old leather couch, planning out every detail of our baby's life. David spent entire weekends assembling the white wooden crib we had picked out together, cursing softly when the instructions did not make sense, but laughing when I would bring him lemonade and kiss his forehead. The nursery became my sanctuary. We chose mint green for the walls because we wanted to be surprised about the gender, and David hung up the sweet elephant mobile that played soft lullabies. I found an antique wooden rocking chair at a thrift store, and David spent hours sanding it down and restaining it until it was perfect. Every evening, I would sit in that chair with my hands on my growing belly, imagining rocking our baby to sleep while David read bedtime stories in his gentle voice. We had our whole plan figured out. David would take 2 weeks off when the baby arrived, and I would cut back on my graphic design work during the first year so I could focus on being a mom. We had $8,000 saved up in our joint account, and David's health insurance through his company would cover most of the medical expenses. I felt so safe and loved and ready to bring our little one into this world we had built together. But around week 32 of my pregnancy, things started to change in ways that made my stomach twist with worry. David began working later, and later sometimes not coming home until after 9 in the evening. When I asked about his day, he would give me short answers about a big project with an important new client. His phone, which used to sit carelessly on our kitchen counter, was now always face down next to him or tucked away in his pocket. One evening when I was doing laundry, I noticed that sweet, expensive smell clinging to his work shirts. It was definitely Chanel No. 5, nothing like the Victoria's Secret bombshell perfume I had been wearing since college. When I mentioned it to David, he shrugged and said one of his female coworkers must have been wearing it during their team meetings. It seemed reasonable enough at the time, but something deep in my gut told me to pay attention. The worst part was how David seemed to lose interest in our baby. For months, he had been so excited about choosing names and talking about what kind of father he wanted to be. But suddenly, when I brought up baby names or asked if he wanted to feel her kicking, he would change the subject or say we had plenty of time to figure things out later. When I scheduled my final ultrasound appointment, David said he could not make it because of an important meeting at work. By week 34, I could not ignore the signs anymore. I started checking our bank statements online and discovered that David had been spending money at Chez Laurent, an expensive French restaurant downtown, on nights when he told me he was eating sandwiches at his desk. When I called his office one evening at 7 to ask when he would be home, the receptionist told me David had left at 5 o'clock. The smell of that unfamiliar perfume got stronger on his clothes, and I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a bouquet of red roses from the flower shop on Main Street. He had never brought me flowers during my entire pregnancy. When I tried to talk to David about my concerns, he brushed me off and said I was being hormonal because of the pregnancy. He made me feel like I was going crazy for noticing all these changes. Then came the night that changed everything. It was week 34, and David had fallen asleep on the couch without locking his phone. As I walked by to turn off the television, I saw a text message notification light up his screen. The message was from someone named Sarah from work, and it said, Cannot wait to see you tomorrow night wear that cologne I love. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought it might wake David up. Our baby girl started kicking frantically inside me like she could sense something terrible was happening. I sat down on our coffee table and stared at that message until my vision blurred with tears. At 2 in the morning, I finally woke David up and confronted him about what I had seen. David looked at me for a long moment, and then his shoulders sagged like he was relieved to finally stop pretending. He told me he had been having an affair with Sarah Martinez, a 26-year-old team lead who had joined his company 3 months earlier. The words hit me like physical blows, and I had to grip the arm of our couch to keep from falling over. But what he said next was even worse. David looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I never wanted to be a father, this young Zoe. Sarah understands my ambitions better than you do. She does not want kids right now either." I felt our baby girl kick hard against my ribs, like she was trying to protect me from the inside, and I started sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The next morning, David packed his belongings into 3 suitcases, like our 3-year marriage was just a business trip that had come to an end. He moved through our apartment efficiently, taking his clothes, his laptop, his coffee mug, and his collection of vintage vinyl records. In 20 minutes, he erased himself from our life completely. Before he walked out the door, David left $500 in cash on our kitchen counter and said, "This should cover groceries for a few weeks." Then he transferred all $8,000 from our joint savings account to his personal account so he could put down a deposit on a new apartment with Sarah. I watched our entire financial security disappear in one online transaction while I stood there 8 months pregnant with his child. The shock of it all sent my body into false labor contractions, and I collapsed on our kitchen floor, clutching my belly and sobbing. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, heard me crying through our thin walls and used her spare key to check on me. This 70-year-old woman who barely knew me drove me to the hospital and held my hand while the nurses hooked me up to monitors. The baby was fine, thank God, but I was severely dehydrated from crying and had not eaten anything in over 24 hours. As I lay in that hospital bed with monitors tracking my daughter's heartbeat, I realized I had nobody else to call except my parents in Phoenix, Arizona. I had not talked to them in months, but surely they would help their pregnant daughter in crisis. I called my mother, Linda, first, and she answered on the third ring with her usual business-like tone. Linda worked as a real estate agent and always sounded like she was in the middle of showing a house to potential buyers. When I told her what David had done, there was a long silence before she said, "I told you David was too immature, Zoe. You should have listened to me from the beginning." Then my father, Richard, got on the phone. He worked as an accountant and approached every problem like it was a spreadsheet that needed balancing. His voice was cold and matter-of-fact when he said, "Zoe, you are 30 years old. You made adult choices, now you need to face adult consequences." I begged them to help me financially, explaining that I had no money for rent or groceries and would be giving birth in just a few weeks. But my parents refused to offer any support. My father said they were preparing for their retirement and could not afford to sacrifice their future for what he called my mistakes. My mother added that I had a college degree and should figure things out like they had done at my age. "I am 8 months pregnant, Mom," I pleaded into the phone. "I cannot work full-time graphic design projects with a newborn baby." But my mother's response crushed whatever hope I had left. She said, "You should have thought about that before getting pregnant, Zoe. We raised you to be independent, not to come running to us every time life gets difficult." The phone call ended with me crying alone in that hospital room, listening to my daughter's steady heartbeat on the monitor and wondering how I was going to survive the next few months. The 2 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had abandoned me just like David did, and I felt more alone than I ever thought possible. The last 8 weeks of my pregnancy became a nightmare of working long hours while my body grew heavier and more uncomfortable every day. I took on as many graphic design contracts as I could find, working until midnight to design logos and websites for small businesses that paid me just enough to cover my $1,200 monthly rent. I lived on 99-cent ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches because that was all I could afford after paying for rent and utilities. I sold my wedding ring to a pawn shop for $2,500, and that money became my emergency fund for when the baby arrived. David stopped answering my phone calls completely, even when I tried to reach him about child support paperwork and putting his name on the birth certificate. Every doctor's appointment became a lonely reminder that I was facing this pregnancy completely on my own. I sat in waiting rooms, surrounded by couples holding hands and talking excitedly about their babies, while I filled out paperwork by myself and tried not to cry when the nurse called me back for my checkup. When the contractions started getting stronger at 36 weeks, there was nobody to time them with me or reassure me that everything would be okay. My landlord made everything worse by informing me that my rent was going up to $1,500 starting the next month. I had to find a cheaper place to live, and the only thing I could afford was a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood for $900 a month. I packed up our beautiful nursery by myself, crying as I wrapped up the elephant mobile and dismantled the crib that David had put together with so much love and excitement. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me move my few belongings to the studio apartment, and I will never forget what she told me as we carried boxes up the stairs. She looked at me with such kindness in her eyes and said, "Mija, you are stronger than you think. This baby is lucky to have a mama who fights so hard for her." Those last few weeks, I had Braxton Hicks contractions every single night from the stress and exhaustion. I would lie on my air mattress in that tiny studio, rubbing my belly and talking to my daughter, promising her that somehow we were going to build a good life together, even though I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. My real labor started at 3 in the morning when I was exactly 39 weeks pregnant. The contractions hit me like lightning bolts, and I knew immediately that this was not another false alarm. I was completely alone in my studio apartment, and the contractions were already 3 minutes apart by the time I managed to call an Uber to take me to the hospital. The ride to the hospital was terrifying because each contraction made me grip the door handle and try not to scream. The Uber driver kept looking at me in his rearview mirror with panic in his eyes, probably worried I was going to give birth in his back seat. When we got to the emergency room, I stumbled through the automatic doors and told the nurse that my baby was coming right now. They rushed me up to the maternity ward, and I labored for 14 hours without a single person there to support me. The nurses were incredibly kind and did their best to help, but they had other patients to care for too. A nurse named Jennifer, who was in her 40s and had 3 children of her own, stayed with me during the hardest parts and held my hand when I thought I could not push anymore. "You are doing this for both of you now, honey," Jennifer told me as I pushed with everything I had left. "Your little girl is going to be so proud of how brave her mama was." At 6:43 in the evening, Emma Marie was born, weighing 6 pounds and 8 ounces, with the most beautiful blue eyes I had ever seen. She looked exactly like me, and when they placed her on my chest, I fell in love in a way I never knew was possible. I tried calling David to tell him about Emma's birth, but he did not answer his phone. When it came time to fill out the birth certificate paperwork, I decided to write "Father Unknown," rather than deal with the drama and legal complications of putting David's name down. I signed all the hospital documents by myself while Emma slept peacefully in my arms, and I promised her that we were going to be just fine. The hospital bill came to $4,200 even after my insurance coverage, and I had to use most of my emergency fund to pay it. When we went home to my studio apartment, Emma had to sleep in a laundry basket lined with soft blankets because I had sold her crib to help pay the hospital bill. But she did not seem to mind, and I would lie on my air mattress next to her basket, watching her tiny chest rise and fall while she dreamed. The first 2 years of Emma's life were the hardest years of my life, but also the most rewarding. I suffered from postpartum depression that went untreated because I could not afford adequate mental health coverage. I worked on graphic design projects from 9 in the evening until 2 in the morning after Emma fell asleep, surviving on 3 or 4 hours of sleep each night. Daycare cost $800 a month, which I could not afford, so Mrs. Rodriguez became my lifesaver by watching Emma for $10 an hour when I had client meetings or needed to work during the day. The WIC program helped me afford baby formula and groceries, and I learned to swallow my pride and accept help when I needed it. When Emma was 6 months old, David suddenly reappeared with a lawyer demanding visitation rights with his daughter. The court battle lasted 8 months and cost me money I did not have for legal fees. Eventually, the judge ordered David to pay $400 a month in child support, but he was always late with payments and sometimes skipped months entirely. During that court process, I learned that David and Sarah had broken up when she found out he had a baby. Sarah apparently had not known I was pregnant when their affair started, and when Emma was born, Sarah decided she did not want to date a man with that kind of baggage. David actually blamed me for ruining his relationship and accused me of destroying his life by having his child. Emma got sick constantly with ear infections during her first year, and I spent countless nights at the Children's Hospital emergency room, holding her while she cried and wishing I had someone to share the worry with. But slowly, I started to build a new life for us. I enrolled in online business courses using a Pell Grant, and I began to understand how to market my graphic design skills more effectively. My big breakthrough came when Emma was 2 years old. I landed a contract to design a complete website for a regional bank, and the project was such a success that they referred 5 other clients to me. Within 6 months, my monthly income had grown from $1,800 to $3,500, and for the first time since David left, I felt like we might actually be okay. I was able to move us into a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, and Emma started attending preschool 3 days a week. She was such a social, happy child, despite everything we had been through, and watching her make friends and learn new things filled my heart with so much joy. I bought a reliable Toyota Camry, so we did not have to depend on the bus anymore, and I started building an emergency fund that grew to $10,000 over 18 months. The best part of our new life was meeting Marcus at Emma's preschool pickup line. He was 32 years old and taught 4th grade at the elementary school next door. Marcus was patient and kind, and Emma immediately took to calling him Mr. Marcus and lighting up whenever she saw him. I was very careful about trusting anyone new after what David had done to us, but Marcus proved himself over 6 months by being consistent, reliable, and genuinely caring about both Emma and me. By the time Emma turned 4 years old, my graphic design business had grown beyond anything I had ever imagined possible. I named it Zoe Creative Studio, and I had 6 employees working with me on projects for clients all over the Pacific Northwest. Our annual revenue reached $200,000, and I was able to buy a beautiful 3-bedroom house with a big backyard where Emma could play safely. Emma was thriving in her private preschool, taking piano lessons and swimming lessons, and filling our house with laughter and music every single day. I had started speaking at single mothers support groups, sharing my story, and encouraging other women who were facing similar struggles. Marcus proposed to me after 2 years of dating, and Emma was so excited about the prospect of having a daddy that she helped him pick out my engagement ring. We were planning a small wedding for the fall with about 50 guests, and I felt like we had truly built something beautiful from the ashes of abandonment. David had started trying to build a relationship with Emma after his relationship with Sarah ended permanently, but Emma was old enough now to understand that he had not been there when she needed him most. Then one afternoon, while Emma and I were baking chocolate chip cookies in our kitchen, my phone rang with a call from an unknown Arizona number. When I answered, I heard my mother's voice for the first time in over 4 years. "Hi, honey, it is Mom," Linda said, and her voice sounded older and smaller than I remembered. "Dad and I have been thinking, and we would love to meet our granddaughter." I stood there in stunned silence for at least 30 seconds while Emma tugged on my apron and asked, "Who is on the phone, Mommy?" I could not believe that after 4 years of complete silence, my parents were calling like nothing had happened. My mother continued talking, explaining that she and my father were getting older and had started to realize they had made mistakes. "We are lonely, Zoe," she admitted. "We realize now that we want our family back in our lives." Then my father took the phone, and I heard Richard's voice for the first time since that horrible conversation in the hospital. "Zoe, we saw your business featured in the Phoenix Business Journal online," he said. "We had no idea you had become so successful. We are very proud of you." The anger that surged through me was so intense, I had to sit down at my kitchen table. "Where were you when I was sleeping on an air mattress with a newborn baby?" I asked them. "Where were you when I was choosing between paying rent and buying groceries?" Where were you when I was sitting alone in a hospital room 8 months pregnant and abandoned by my husband? My mother started crying on the other end of the line. We thought we were teaching you independence, honey. We did not realize how hard things really were for you. We thought you would figure it out and then come back to us when you were ready. You chose your retirement comfort over your pregnant daughter's survival. I told them, and I could hear my father clear his throat uncomfortably. You literally told me that I had made adult choices and needed to face adult consequences. Do you remember saying that to me? My parents asked if they could come visit and bring presents for Emma to make up for lost time. They talked about taking her to Disneyland and spoiling her like grandparents should do. I agreed to start with a video call so Emma could meet her grandparents, but I made it clear that rebuilding our relationship would take time and effort on their part. The video call was awkward and emotional. Linda and Richard were overly enthusiastic with Emma showing her toys they had bought and making promises about future trips and adventures. Emma was polite, but shy, hiding behind my shoulder and not really understanding why these strangers were so excited to talk to her. After the call, Emma asked me, "Mommy, why do not they live close like Mrs. Rodriguez?" I had to explain in terms a 4-year-old could understand that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and need time to learn how to be better people. Marcus supported whatever decision I made about my parents, but I spent several sleepless nights thinking about forgiveness versus boundaries. I realized that Emma deserved the chance to know her grandparents, but I also needed to protect her from people who might abandon her if things got difficult. A week later, I called my parents back with my decision. "You can meet Emma, but it comes with conditions," I told them. "You do not get to be grandparents without acknowledging what you did to us. Emma needs consistency, not people who will disappear when life gets challenging." We agreed that my parents could visit twice a year for Emma's birthday and Christmas, but there would be no overnight stays until trust was rebuilt over several years. I also insisted that they attend family counseling sessions with me to work through the pain they had caused. Linda and Richard agreed to all my conditions because they were desperate to have a relationship with their granddaughter. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on everything that had brought us to this moment. I learned that the family you choose is often stronger than the family you are born into. Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus, even Nurse Jennifer, during Emma's birth, they had become my real family when my blood relatives walked away. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting what happened or pretending it did not matter. It means setting boundaries that protect your peace while still leaving room for growth and change. Emma will know her grandparents, but she will also learn that love requires action, not just words and promises. Sometimes the worst betrayal in your life leads you to discover strength you never knew existed inside you. When David left me 8 months pregnant, and when my parents turned their backs on me in my darkest hour, I thought my life was over. But losing everything taught me that I was capable of building something even better from scratch. I look at Emma playing in our backyard now, and I realize that we built something beautiful from the ashes of abandonment. She is confident, loved, and surrounded by people who choose to be in our lives every single day. The people who were supposed to catch me when I fell taught me how to fly instead. What would you do if your family abandoned you in your greatest time of need? Have you ever had to rebuild your life completely from the ground up? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I love hearing your stories and supporting each other through difficult times. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and share this with someone who might need to hear that they are stronger than they know. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes losing everything is the beginning of finding yourself. I will see you in the next video.